Chapter 51. Willow thought her mother was right, but she couldn't wait for her mother to give birth to a son. The two evil kids were a huge threat to her. She had to find out who they were and get rid of them. At Beach Villa, "Mommy, aren't you going to eat? Why are you just watching?" Colton asked while biting down on his spoon after noticing that his mother hadn't touched her food but instead was just staring at the three of them. Daisy and Waylon thought that their mother was a little off too. Maisie asked Daisy and Waylon, "Were you in contact with some weird man recently?" "Which weird man?" Maisie looked down. "Nothing. If someone approaches you and asks you anything, ignore them. Good children don't speak to strangers, alright?" Waylon seemed to have understood who this weird man was. He gave Colton and Daisy a look. Daisy sat next to Maisie. "Mommy, we just met Uncle Boucher, no other men." "Why did you meet him?" "Mommy, don't be mad, he doesn't know who our mommy is, and we didn't tell him, he's Godmother's cousin. So he's not going to do anything to us," Daisy said in a baby voice. Maisie took a deep breath and patted her head. "Didn't I say that the entertainment business isn't good for you? You're putting yourself out there. What if? What if Layla and Willow, or even Nolan, did something to them?" "Don't worry, Mommy, Uncle Helios will take care of us, so nothing is going to happen," Waylon said. Maisie was agitated. Helios was friends with Nolan. Didn't the children just put themselves up for slaughter? "No, you're not getting into showbiz." "But we've signed the contract. The penalty for a breach of contract is very severe." Daisy pouted. Maisie was rendered speechless. She was going to implode. Colton came to her side and hugged her. "Mommy, please don't be angry, Waylon and Daisy just wanted to help you out. And no one will be able to bully them with their wits. Go on, wasn't your sister slapped? Maisie stopped upon recalling something while staring at the three rascals. "That's odd. How did you meet Willow and Layla?" She had never thought about it because she was angry that Daisy had been slapped. Now that she thought about it, how did the three find out about them? The three looked embarrassed. Daisy smiled and said, "Godmother told us. Willow and that old woman bullied you, so we despise them." Maisie was again rendered speechless. Riley just kept selling her out. "Mommy, please agree to it." Daisy moved her body from side to side. Maisie was helpless. "You three little rascals. How dare you work together to corner me?" They had learned to shoot first and ask later. The three rascals all gave a huge grin. The next day, at Royal Crown, Nolan went to the company, and the higher-ups all came to meet him. Royal Crown was the entertainment company under the Goldman Group. Everyone knew that. Nolan's mother, Natasha Knowles, had been one of the biggest stars of Royal Crown of her time, the fairest of Basburg. Chapter 52. Nolan's father, Mr. Goldman Sr., had started as a fan of Natasha's, and because of her, he had purchased Royal Crown with a huge sum of money and managed to take her home. It wasn't just Mr. Goldman Sr. Helios' father had been smitten by her as well. And this was something that everyone talked about for a long time back in the day. "Mr. Goldman, how nice of you to visit us," Mr. Mayweather, the director of Royal Crown, greeted him. "Didn't you sign 2 children, where are they?" Mr. Mayweather was stunned but smiled and answered. The two had been getting endorsement deals ever since they made a name being on the magazine cover with Helios. Nolan squinted. "Endorsement deals from which company?" Mr. Mayweather answered, "An advertiser under Snowflake." After finding out where the children were, Nolan went to the advertiser. The 2 children's manager, Angela, was with them at the location of the shoot. Helios had introduced her to the children, and since they had their breakthrough just by appearing in a shoot with Helios before their official debut, it was evident that they had potential. Waylon and Daisy were in matching outfits and finished shooting an ad with the direction of the crew. They were highly praised. The two not only had a great presence, but they also worked together perfectly, getting the script right in one take. When Nolan showed up at the set, the crew was in shock. Daisy turned around to look at him. She hopped over to him and looked up at him. "Mister, what brings you here?" Nolan patted her head and grinned. "To see you." Angela was stunned. Mr. Goldman himself showed up to visit the kids. "Hold on, why do they look so much like Mr. Goldman?" Waylon walked over to him too. The entire crew was in awe of their strong resemblance. No one would believe it if someone said these two weren't his children. Nolan looked at them. "Do you want to grab a meal with me after the shoot? I think I owe you." Daisy's eyes shone. "Yes, please." Waylon shot her a look, but agreed after seeing her eagerness. Mr. Goldman, but Angela felt that something was off. How was she going to explain this? Nolan looked at her. "Go back and tell them that I'm taking them out. I'll send them back after our meal." At a high-end restaurant, when the server brought out 2 platters of Australian lobsters, Daisy happily bobbed her head, waiting to dig in. After Waylon helped her roll up her sleeves, he picked up the cracker to help her remove the shell. Seeing how familiar Waylon was with this, Nolan squinted and asked, "Did your mom teach you this?" "Yes, Mommy loves lobsters, just like Daisy." Waylon caringly removed the flesh and placed them on Daisy's plate. Daisy was swinging her legs under the table. It was time to dig in. Nolan looked at them with his chin on his hand. He was wondering who their mother was and how she had managed to bring them up so polite and mature. "Who is Riley to you?" Daisy dug her spoon into the lobster pile, looked up, and said, "Our godmother." Waylon kicked her under the table, and Daisy realized her mistake. She beamed at Nolan. "Why do you ask?" Chapter 53. Nolan grinned. "No reason, I was just curious." "Are you interested in our godmother?" Daisy giggled. Nolan's expression froze. Daisy looked cheeky, her eyes smiling while she tilted her head. "You're interested in our mommy then?" Nolan paused, looked down, and smiled. "What if I am?" Daisy and Waylon were shocked. "But you have a girlfriend." Daisy pretended to be sorry. Nolan's eyes slightly turned dark. "Who told you that?" Daisy answered, "A little birdie told us." "She isn't my girlfriend." Nolan didn't know why he was explaining himself to these 2 children. Waylon frowned. "Why do you spend time with her if she isn't your girlfriend? Grown-ups would call you a bad person. Even if he was their father. They wouldn't just hand their mother over to him." Nolan was rendered speechless. Daisy turned her head. "Waylon, don't say that about him, he's not a bad person, he bought us lobsters." Waylon hummed. "You're being bought over with lobsters?" His sister was a traitor. Nolan rubbed his hair. "It's not how you think it is, I'll explain one day." He had to clear some things up first. Waylon was surprised, but he didn't say anything back. After the meal, they were sent back to the company. Nolan opened up his palms after the kids left. He was holding 2 strands of hair from Nolan's head. "Quincy." Quincy turned around. "Yes, Mr. Goldman." Nolan said calmly, "To the Bureau of Justice." He had to run a test. The next day, #shocked, Mr. Goldman showed up at a restaurant with children. And they're the 2 child stars that Royal Crown signed. Are they his children? Paparazzi had captured Nolan and the kids' visit to the restaurant, and it was all over the news the next day. When Quincy saw the report, he carefully looked up. "Mr. Goldman, the news." Seeing Nolan frowning, he changed his narrative. "I'm going to get them to quash the news. How dare these paparazzi follow him around?" Nolan didn't say a thing. He was more interested in Maisie's reaction than the news itself. Maisie, Kennedy, and Xander were having a meeting in the meeting room. She had recruited the best employees that left Venna to her current company to build a new jewelry brand. "Ms. Vanderbilt, have you decided on the name of the brand?" Xander asked. Maisie crossed her arms while thinking. Riley called at that moment, so Maisie stood up with her phone in hand. I need to take this call. She walked to the corridor. I'm in a meeting, why are you calling me? And your meeting, something happened. Upon hearing Riley yelling at the top of her lungs, she frowned and asked, what's going on? Watch the news. Waylon and Daisy were photographed having a meal with Mr. Goldman. They're being rumored to be his children. Maisie's face froze upon hearing that. All right, I'll deal with this. After hanging up, she held on to her phone and bit her lip. She had asked Waylon and Daisy to be careful of weird people, but now Nolan had gotten to them. Chapter 54. Had he discovered something? No, she couldn't let Layla and Willow know about the two kids. Z, are you all right? Kennedy was worried, so he came over to check. Maisie turned around and forced a smile. I'm all right. Give me a few days to decide on the name of the brand. There's something I need to take care of. All right then. Kennedy nodded. Maisie bumped into a man who was getting out of the elevator while she was getting in. She looked up and froze. Nolan seemed to be getting in her way on purpose. Where are you going? There's something I need to take care of. Are you concerned about this too? Maisie smiled. Have you watched the news? Maisie's smile slightly dropped, but it wasn't enough for him to notice. What news? Nolan passed his phone to her. Maisie looked at the photo of him, Waylon, and Daisy and laughed. You meant the two children? Nolan looked tense. She was still highly suspicious of him. Maisie handed the phone back to him. I'm sorry, Mr. Goldman, I need to get going. Nolan grabbed her arm and pushed her against the wall. Maisie struggled. What are you doing? Why are you going out now? Nolan kept his eyes on her face, not wanting to miss any of her micro-expressions. Maisie looked down and gnashed her teeth. Mr. Goldman, we are partners. I'm not your employee, so you have no control over me. Nolan grabbed onto her shoulders tightly and moved closer. What if I want to be in control? You. I just asked why you're going out. Why are you nervous? Is it because? Nolan's thin lips parted. You're afraid that I would learn something from the two children? Maisie held her fist tightly and pressed her lips together. She almost lost her mind and fell into his trap. Her phone started ringing. She relaxed a little. When she saw who was calling, her lips curled. Your girlfriend is calling me, how could I not go? Nolan's eyes turned dark. He stared at the caller ID on the phone and took a while before letting her go. After being released, Maisie walked to the elevator and said, if you're worried about your girlfriend spending time with me, you're welcome to come along. She stepped into the elevator right after saying that, not giving him time to answer. When the doors closed, the tension she held in her throat was finally released. Willow had called at the perfect moment. A moment later and her secrets might be exposed. When exiting Black Gold's building, Willow called again. Maisie picked up. What? Maisie, you better answer me. Are those two bastards yours? Bastards. Anger flashed across Maisie's eyes. I don't know what you mean. Willow gnashed her teeth as she looked at the two kids that had been photographed with Nolan. Are you sure you don't have children? Even though her mother had said that the kids looked exactly like Nolan, she had never seen them herself. But that day, that was the day she believed that the two bastards existed. She couldn't wait any longer, no matter if those children were Maisie's or not. Chapter 55. Why are you so sure that I have kids? Because 6 years ago, Willow stopped there, but seemed to have remembered something and started looking guilty. Oh no, if she said that, Maisie would know who the man from 6 years ago was. What happened 6 years ago? Maisie sat in the car, looking eerily calm. Nothing, those kids better not be yours. Maisie noticed something from Willow's tone. Her eyes shone. What? You saw the news and realized that you're not as safe as you think you were. So you're trying to do something to the kids? If they're not yours, it's none of your business. Willow hung up, and her eyes were cold. She still did not believe that Maisie didn't have kids. She was the one who had slept with Nolan 6 years ago. Those 2 children hadn't shown up until around the time Maisie returned. That was too much of a coincidence. Since Maisie was concerned about what she was going to use those 2 rascals to spill the secret. She picked up her phone and made another call. It's me, same thing. I'll give you $80,000, and you help me with something. I'll give you another $80,000 when it's done. At the Judicial Appraisal Center, a doctor with a surgical mask walked to the office and went in. The middle-aged man in the office looked up and smiled. Oh, Dr. Joe. What brings you here? Definitely here about an investigation. I brought the sample of blood traces left by the killer. Dr. Joe gave the documents and sample disc to the man. The man looked up, stood up, and said, "Sure, I'll get someone to help right away." After the middle-aged man left, he looked at a sealed document on his desk. A DNA report was inside. He immediately took out his phone and took a few pictures, switched it with another stack of information, put the folder back in place, and left the office as if nothing had happened. When he got to the trash can at the stairs, he tore that stack of information up, rolled the pieces into a ball, and threw it into the can. Riley received a message. She was aghast when she saw the image in the message. Maisie asked, "What's wrong?" Riley gave her her phone. "Joe took pictures, see for yourself." Maisie looked at pictures of the results that Joe had taken. Nolan was really their father. The man from 6 years ago was him. Z, how did you know that Mr. Goldman would run a paternity test? Riley hadn't recovered from the shock. This was big news. Her suspicions during the party had been true. The 3 rascals were really Nolan's. Because he tested me. Maisie frowned. So I suspected that he would get close to Waylon and Daisy. If he got close to them, there would be a chance that he would run a DNA test. Thankfully, Joe worked in the Bureau of Justice as a coroner. If not for him, Nolan would have found out that the children were his. Shouldn't you be happy now that you found the children's father? Riley didn't understand. There was no way to change the fact that they were Nolan's kids. Maisie raised her head calmly. He might have been working with Willow 6 years ago. Do you think a man like that could be a good father to my children? Chapter 56. Given Mr. Goldman's status, it would be extremely weird if he really did work with Willow to frame you 6 years ago. Riley's words silenced Maisie, and she continued. Furthermore, if he knew about what happened 6 years ago, wouldn't he have known that the 3 rascals are his children? He wouldn't need to get a paternity test. Maisie looked down. I know what you mean. He probably wouldn't be interested in working with Willow to frame me, but he's still Willow's boyfriend. I'm not interested in anything that's related to Willow. The corner of Riley's lips twitched. Maisie was just being picky. Riley seemed to have remembered something and smiled. Why don't you consider my cousin then, seeing how much he dotes on Waylon and Daisy? I'm sure he'd be happy. Haha, you're dragging your cousin into this? Helios fans would tear her apart if they heard this. Riley laughed, her shoulders shaking. Do not tell Waylon and the rest about anything that happened today. I'm going to drag you in mud if you spill anything. Riley waved. No way, don't worry, my lips are sealed. This involves the children, no one can know. Willow is already suspecting me, and I think she might do something to Daisy and Waylon. What? Riley was anxious. Should I get Helios to keep an eye open? Seeing that Maisie was suspicious of her, she patted her chest and said in a serious tone, if you think that I'm unreliable, Helios will at least be reliable, right? Maisie picked up her bag and got up. Thank him for me then. That night at the beach villas, the 3 rascals were in the corner, reflecting on their mistakes. Maisie sat cross-legged on the couch, looking at them. Think hard about your mistakes, or you're going to bed without dinner. Daisy turned around. Mommy. That mister just wanted to buy Waylon and me some food. He bought you over with just some food? Maisie crossed her arms. Are you going to sell me off if he buys you big lobsters? Daisy pouted. They really did have big lobsters. What did I say? Don't talk to strangers. If you were to be kidnapped one day, don't say, I never warned you. Mommy, we wouldn't be kidnapped, we're not dumb, Colton murmured. Stand up straight. The three stood up straight, looking at each other. They knew that their mother must have watched the news and found out that they were secretly in touch with their father. She must have been furious. Their father being with the woman that their mother hated the most was the nail in the coffin. If they didn't get rid of that horrible woman, their mother wasn't going to accept their father. A thought flashed through Colton's mind. He smiled and looked at the other two as though he was telling them his plans. He whispered something to Daisy, whose eyes shone. She immediately turned around and cried. Mommy. That mister smells just like Daddy. We never had a father, so we just wanted to feel what it was like to have a dad when we went to eat with him. She sat down and started crying after saying that. Maisie was stunned. How would she not feel bad while seeing Daisy crying so sadly? She stood up but kept the urge to coddle her under control. She frowned and said, Daisy, I know all of you want a father, but that man really isn't. Chapter 57. Maisie couldn't deny that she lied. Even if she knew that the man from 6 years ago was indeed Nolan, she couldn't accept it. The kids getting so close to Nolan would give Willow a chance to attack them. Waylon turned and looked at her. Mommy. Why are you afraid that we'd get close to that mister? Maisie didn't answer. Was she afraid that Nolan would find out these were his children, or was she worried that Layla and Willow would do something to them? Mommy, your brows are pointing upward from the inside. It means you're worried or afraid, confused. Is that man related to us? She downright denied it. You're not related. Waylon shrugged. Mommy, your tone sold you out, you're feeling guilty. She was caught. How could she forget that this boy preferred psychology books over fairy tales even though he was very young? Even if she could fool Colton and Daisy, she couldn't fool Waylon. She took a deep breath to calm down. She had to change the subject. Let's get some takeout. How about some lobsters? Daisy, who was crying out loud, suddenly sat up and said, yes. Waylon and Colton stared at her. She really was easily bought over. The next day, at Black Gold Group, Quincy got the report from the Bureau of Justice and gave the information to Nolan. When he opened the results, his gaze was dark. Quincy gulped upon seeing his expression and asked, Mr. Goldman, what's the outcome? Nolan put down the results after being silent for a moment. Quincy walked over and picked it up. It showed a negative result, no blood relations. He sighed. Mr. Goldman, you definitely overworried, those children aren't yours. They just looked like him. Mr. Goldman was probably just getting a bad case of baby fever. Nolan put down the document and said, look at the date. Quincy paused, picked up the document, and looked at the date on the left upper corner. That wasn't the date that Mr. Goldman had visited. It was 2 days earlier. This report isn't yours. Quincy was shocked, but then said innocently, how could the Bureau of Justice make such a huge mistake? Nolan coldly scoffed. Do you really think that the Bureau made a mistake? How could they make a mistake like this? Quincy shook his head. He didn't believe it. If it wasn't an error, then someone must have messed it up on purpose and switched the report. Only he and Mr. Goldman knew about them going to the Bureau. Mr. Goldman, this report. Leave it, get someone to secretly run another test in Corelia. Quincy nodded, turned, and left. Hold on. Anything else, Mr. Goldman? Nolan looked at the report on the desk and calmly said, let the information leak and send someone to observe. If someone tried to stop it the last time, then they would do it again. Maisie got to the office and walked past a few employees who were talking about the news from the other day. Does Mr. Goldman really have children? The resemblance is mind-blowing. There's some other woman aside from Ms. Vanderbilt, why else would he openly run a paternity test? Chapter 58. Maisie slowed down, and a frown slowly formed on her face. Nolan made public the paternity test? She turned and looked toward the staff in front of the elevator. They were too engrossed in the discussion and didn't notice her. Is that true? Don't spread rumors. Quincy confirmed it. Why would he lie? But isn't it weird for Mr. Goldman to go all the way to Karelia to run a test? Doesn't Basburg have a Bureau of Justice? Maisie froze in her tracks, and her hands balled up. What was going on? Did he not believe that the report was real? Joe had been very careful. Nolan just wanted proof. Anyone who saw the negative results would have just let it go. If he really was going to get a test at Karelia, she had to do something. She took out her phone and hesitated. Was she really going to send someone to intercept it at Karelia? Wait a second. Maisie stopped. It was suspicious for Nolan to make the test public. He had already run a test. If he didn't believe that the results were real, it meant he knew that a switch had happened. Now that he was going to run another test and had made it a public matter, she would walk straight into his trap if she sent someone to stop it. She was going to play along. She saw a male colleague walking over, so she smiled and walked over. Hello, my phone is out of battery. Can I borrow yours to send a text? The man stopped. He was willing to help because she was a beauty, so he handed her his phone. Thanks. Maisie went through her contacts, sent a message to Layla with his phone, and immediately deleted it. When she returned the phone, she patted his shoulder and said, "It was a message to my ex who cheated on me. You can ignore it if he replies." At Vanderbilt Manor, Layla was cooking in the kitchen. She had to start eating healthy in preparation for the pregnancy and seal her place in the Vanderbilt fortune when she gave birth to a son. Her phone vibrated. Layla lowered the fire and walked to the side to read the message sent from an unknown number. She was flabbergasted. Mr. Goldman was going to run a paternity test at Karelia. Did he think that those bastards were his? That wasn't good. No way. She had to inform her daughter. Willie, you need to come back immediately, there's something I need to tell you. Mr. Goldman. The entire company is talking about the news. I'm guessing everyone knows now. Did she hear too? Quincy was caught off guard. He looked at Nolan, who was going through some documents. Was she referring to Ms. Vanderbilt? I guess so. Everyone's talking about it. Quincy's reply was but a whisper. He couldn't be sure if she had heard. Nolan shuffled the documents into a stack. Maisie must have heard about the news, but what would she do? He wanted to know. On the 16th floor. Z. I helped you apply for an official jewelry website. Once the authorization is confirmed, it'll probably start picking up some traction. Have you come up with a name for the brand? Kennedy asked. Maisie thought about it for a moment. Let's call it. Chapter 59. Soul? Kennedy was uncertain. Each design has its own value, even if it's an inanimate object. If it doesn't have soul, then there's no meaning to the creation. After hearing her interpretation, Kennedy nodded with his hand on his chin. A deep voice came from behind the door just when he was about to say something. Maisie's smile slightly froze upon seeing Nolan walk in. Why was he here? Kennedy nodded to him. Nolan looked at him. This must be Mr. Kennedy Fannin. I've heard of you in the jewelry world of Basburg. Kennedy grinned. It's an honor that you've heard of me. Mr. Goldman, what brings you here? Maisie grinned. Knowing that this was the man from 6 years ago, she was a little devastated. He calmly said, Since this is a partnership, shouldn't I know how the preparation for the jewelry brand under Black Gold is going? Maisie smiled but didn't reply. She didn't think that he was there to ask about the preparation of the new jewelry brand, but to see if she had taken any actions. Of course you should, you're the investor, we should serve you, we wouldn't want people saying that we're not being polite. Maisie got up. I don't have good tea here, there are just some normal tea leaves, but I'm guessing you probably won't have time for tea? Not at all. Nolan sat down on the couch and looked up. I have time for tea. Maisie was rendered speechless. Kennedy looked at her. I'll go make some tea. After Kennedy walked out, Maisie crossed her arms, leaned on the table, and looked at him. You're probably not just here for the tea, right? No. Nolan crossed his legs and leaned back. I'm running a paternity test on the two children. You're here for personal matters? He squinted. You're not surprised? Maisie smiled. I'm not interested in your personal matters, why would I be surprised? It would be normal to react when people hear such news. I'm actually surprised at how calm you are. Nolan's eyes stared straight through her. Maisie hugged herself tighter. She thought that she was controlling her emotions very well, but this man's sharp gaze was enough to make her nervous. She couldn't be sure if he was just testing her or if he had actually found something. Never mind that. If she didn't admit to it, it wouldn't be an issue. How shocked should I be? The entire company is talking about the news of your paternity test. I've heard it already. I can't be surprised the second time I hear it. Seeing that Nolan's face dropped, Maisie continued. I think the one who should be shocked is Willow. She has been by your side for 6 years, but now you're running a paternity test. How sad will she be when she finds out? Nolan's lips were pressed into a thin, hard line, his eyes cold. The mood only relaxed so slightly when Kennedy brought the tea in. But Nolan was no longer interested in a drink. He got up and left. Chapter 60. Kennedy was surprised. What's wrong with Mr. Goldman? Maisie shrugged. No idea, he probably doesn't feel like having tea anymore. At Vanderbilt Manor, Layla paced the living room anxiously. She still didn't know the results of the test after half a day of waiting. Willow had a mask on while she lounged on the couch. Seeing how worried her mother was, she said, Mom, pacing around isn't going to help, the children have to go. No matter what the result of the test comes back as. Layla was shocked and turned to look at her. What do you mean? If something happens to the bastards, we will know who the woman hiding behind them is. Willow took off the mask. She had already made arrangements. She had to find out who the woman hiding behind the children was no matter what the results came back as. Layla was a little worried. But what if someone finds out what you did? Why are you worried? I'm not going to get rid of them, I just want to force the woman out. If they don't follow instructions, they're going to experience some discomfort. It won't be my fault if anything more happens to them. Willow wouldn't be worried. They were just 2 kids. If they played around and someone broke an arm, it would be the parents' fault for not keeping an eye on them. Who else could they blame? Angela stopped the car in front of a bakery, pulled on the handbrake, and turned around. Stay in the car. I'm going to get you some cakes. Thanks, Angela. Daisy smiled and waved. 2 men suddenly got into the car not long after Angela entered the bakery. Daisy looked at them and was ready to scream when Waylon put a hand over her mouth. One of the men angrily turned around, holding a knife. Listen to me, I won't use this if you behave. The men drove the car away. Angela, who was in the bakery, rushed out and yelled, Hey, someone stole my car. No. The children were being kidnapped. She took out her phone and called Helios. She could only ask him for help. The men drove the car out of town. The children were quiet throughout the entire journey. The man in the passenger seat turned around and looked at them, then spoke to the driver. They don't seem to be afraid of us. Enough with the bullcrap. Do you want to attract the attention of the police? The driver was impatient. The car drove into the compound of an abandoned glass factory. The two men got out of the car and grabbed the two children. "You're pulling on my hair." Daisy looked at him with tears streaming down her face. The man paused but suddenly yelled, "No crying." Daisy sniffled and stopped the tears. The man brought them into the glass factory. Daisy, who was scared by cockroaches, suddenly hugged onto the man's thigh and screamed, "There are cockroaches." The man stepped on the cockroach. "It's just a roach, stop crying. Don't argue with a kid. Tie her up." The man with a crew cut rushed him after tying up Waylon. After the man tied Daisy, she lowered her head to look and sadly said, "Mister, I want a bow." The man's hand trembled. He suddenly looked at her, "Bow. You stupid girl. Stop being so difficult."